The evening wasn't just cold. It was piercing, clinging, as if autumn itself had decided to squeeze the last drops of warmth from the world. The wind didn't blow. It howled, whirling dust, scraps of newspaper, and plastic bags into dust devils, the bags snapping like soundless applause for oblivion. On the city's edge, where the asphalt surrendered to dandelions and burdock, lay a dump. Not an official landfill with bulldozers, but a wild, sprawling mountain of refuse, a monument to human indifference. It smelled of decay, the sweetish stench of rotting organics, and a sharp, chemical bitterness. It was here, to the accompaniment of this wind and smell, that she sat. To the world, simply a homeless woman. A shapeless bundle in a worn-out coat the color of dirty snow. A hood pulled over her head. Her name was Anna, but that name had been lost somewhere between court summonses, strangers' glances, and endless nights in gateways. It held no weight. She was part of the scenery, as inconspicuous and unnecessary as a crushed can or a broken chair. That evening, a silence more deafening than any noise engulfed her. The silence of total collapse. Today, the last overnight shelter in the city had closed for renovation. Her last 300 rubles, sewn into an inner pocket, had vanished. Perhaps they'd fallen out, or perhaps a boy's clever fingers on the bus had snatched them in a second. She'd begged for alms by the metro, but passers-by gave her a wide berth, and a security guard had politely but firmly asked her not to obstruct the passengers. Strength, that animal, instinctive force to cling to life, was leaving her. Every movement required immense effort. Hunger was no longer a sharp sensation but a background hum, a weakness in the knees. The cold penetrated deep into her bones, making them fragile as glass. She sat on her haunches, her back pressed against the sharp edges of a rusty refrigerator, watching the dusk slowly devour the horizon. And then it erupted from her. Not a cry but something primal, a quiet, wrenching howl that choked her own throat. Tears streamed down her dirty cheeks, leaving pale tracks in the dust. She sobbed, afraid even of this place. Afraid that the garbage, those witnesses to so many discarded lives, would condemn her weakness. She wept for the home she didn't have, for the daughter she couldn't embrace, for herself, that former Anna who believed in schedules, vacations, and a future. Here, at the edge of the world, in the kingdom of the rejected, her despair hit rock bottom. It seemed that beyond lay only cold, starless emptiness. That life now seemed like a dream, vivid but unreal, like an old film. Anna hadn't just had a home, but a cozy two-room apartment on the 3rd floor, with a balcony filled with geraniums. She'd had a job, an accountant at a mid-size firm. Not a dream career, but stable, respectable work. The numbers in her spreadsheets lined up in neat columns, debits matched credits. The world obeyed the logic of balance. There was family. Her husband Sergei, not a romantic hero but reliable, with calm hands and quiet humor. And there was Katyusha, a fair-haired girl with 2 bows and a universe of questions in her eyes. The collapse hadn't come like an earthquake. It had crept in like quiet water undermining a foundation. First, Sergei died, an absurd, stupid accident at a friend's construction site. The world lost its color and its anchor. Then the firm, propped up on a few large contracts, cracked and crumbled into the dust of a crisis. Anna tried to hold on, but depression, a gray, viscous quagmire, sucked her in. She stopped answering calls, missed deadlines, couldn't get out of bed. Relatives, her sister, her aunt, first helped, then advised her to pull herself together, then began muttering through clenched teeth. She's an accountant, she could find work if she wanted to. Debts for the apartment grew. Court summonses became routine mail. The world, once structured and predictable, turned into a labyrinth of humiliating bureaucratic procedures, the cold stares of officials, and the silent condemnation of normal people. The final act of the tragedy was social services. Not out of malice, with cold, flawless logic. Unstable financial situation, inability to provide proper care, psycho-emotional state. Phrases like knives. Katya, crying and uncomprehending, was taken to her aunt's. Anna stood on the empty, lifeless floor of her former apartment, looking at a forgotten doll in the corner, and understood she had lost everything, even the right to cry. She left the building with one backpack, and the door closed behind her forever. Thus began her journey to the bottom, collecting bottles for food, nights in stairwells at train stations, the transformation into a transparent creature no one saw. She clung to life not for herself, but out of a vague, desperate hope to see her daughter again one day. But with each passing day, that hope tarnished like an old coin. That evening, the dump seemed the logical endpoint of her journey, the final geography of her fall. She hadn't come for bottles, she had no strength left for that. She came because it was a place that matched her self-perception. Discarded, unnecessary, final. The wind held a funeral dirge in her ears. She slid to her knees beside a huge blue dumpster with a torn-off door. It smelled of sour rags and mold. And then she broke. Everything that had built up for months, humiliation, fear, longing, powerless rage, poured out in sobs. She screamed into the dirty sleeve of her coat, her body racked with spasms. She spoke to a god she hadn't felt in a long time, to Sergei, to that former self of hers, begging forgiveness for failing, for breaking. In a surge of despair, she struck the ground with her fist, and her knuckles hit something hard. Next to the dumpster, half buried in construction debris, lay a travel bag. Not a torn plastic sack, but an old sturdy bag of dark brown leather, with a broken handle and a large zipper. People carried such bags in another era. It looked alien, like an artifact from the past washed up here by a random wave. Anna, still sniffling, mechanically reached for it to shove it away. This piece of someone else's normal life evoked anger in her. But the moment her fingers touched the rough leather, something clicked inside. A quiet, barely audible voice, the whisper of her own long silent intuition, said, "Open it." It wasn't mysticism. It was a last desperate motion of a mind seeking any point of support, any event in this endless nightmare of monotony. The bag was unexpectedly heavy, seriously heavy, like a toolbox. With hands trembling from cold and weakness, Anna dragged it off the pile of rubble and unzipped it. The rusty slider gave way with difficulty. At first, her brain refused to process the information. Inside, there were no clothes, no papers. There was a dense rectangular bundle wrapped in dark plastic. She tore the film, and the world froze. Anna blinked. Then again. Before her, in neat, dense bricks lay money. Stacks of money. 100-ruble notes. They were bound with bank straps. Some stacks seemed unopened. The smell wasn't earthy or musty, but sharp, acrid, of ink, paper, something new. Her first reaction wasn't delight, but animal terror. She instinctively threw the stack back and scrambled away, hitting her back against the dumpster. Her heart hammered so hard it felt ready to leap from her chest. It's a trap. It's someone's joke. It's a hallucination from hunger. She squeezed her eyes shut, counted to 10 and opened them. The money was still there. It lay in the gaping maw of the bag. A surreal, impossible treasure. Cautiously, as if handling a bomb, she picked up a stack again. The bills were real. Crisp paper, watermarks, raised print. She touched them, smelled them. Reality. Absurd, shocking reality. She began pulling out stacks. 1, 2, 5, 10. She piled them on the ground before her, and soon there was a stack that took her breath away. Her mind, unaccustomed to large numbers, tried to gauge the scale. 10,000? 100? More? Her head spun. This wasn't money. This was possibility made material. And simultaneously mortal danger. Adrenaline displaced fatigue and despair. Now she was shaking with fear. Whose money was this? Cash in transit guards? Gangsters? A corrupt official? Such sums aren't simply lost. They're looked for. People are killed for them. She looked around, expecting to see shadows in the gathering dusk. Every rustle, every screech of metal in the wind made her flinch. Instinct screamed, "Drop it! Run! This is someone else's blood, someone else's trouble." But another deeper voice, hungry, exhausted, craving life, whispered, "A chance. The only chance." With feverish speed, she stuffed the stacks back into the bag, zipped it shut, and looked for a hiding place. Digging her hands into the cold garbage, she burrowed a hole under a pile of broken slate, hid the bag and carefully covered it with debris. Then she settled beside it, pressing herself against the ground, wrapped in her coat. The night lasted an eternity. She didn't close her eyes. Visions raced through her head. She is found and beaten to death in this same garbage. She spends the money and is jailed. She tries to return it and is taken for a thief or an accomplice. But through the fear, another thought broke through. A hot shower. Clean clothes. Warm food. And Katya. By morning, as the sky lightened and the wind died down, the decision had matured. It wasn't easy. It was heavy, like a stone she was taking upon her soul. She wasn't a saint. She was on the brink of death. This money had been thrown onto the dump just like her. Maybe it was unfair. Maybe it was a sin. But she decided to take it. Take it and try to fix at least something. She gave herself 3 vows with the first morning light. Not to squander it, to find out its origin if possible. And above all, to use this chance to get her daughter back and not repeat the path of descent. The first day was like walking a tightrope over an abyss. She took only 1 stack from the bag. She buried the rest again in another, more secure spot. With that stack tucked inside her clothes, she felt not like a wealthy woman, but like a thief about to be caught. Her first purchase wasn't food, but the cheapest clothes from a second-hand store. Simple jeans, a sweater, underwear, sneakers. She couldn't bring herself to take off the coat. It was her armor. Then she found a cheap hostel on the outskirts where, for cash and no questions, she got a bunk for a night. A shower. Hot, almost scalding water, washing away layers of grime, sweat, and despair from her skin. She stood under the stream until her skin turned red, crying silently as she watched black rivulets run from her body down the drain. Then she looked into the foggy mirror. Before her stood an unfamiliar woman. A haggard face with deep shadows under the eyes, short, dull hair. But in those eyes, for the first time in many months, was not the haze of despair, but sharp animal fear and determination. She rented a tiny room in a dormitory again for cash. Restoring her documents became her first major battle. She stood in lines, filled out forms, caught sympathetic or disdainful looks from officials, but now she had an inner support. She had a goal. Every step, obtaining a new passport, tax ID, pension certificate, was a victory. She caught herself pinching her arm at night, checking if this was a dream. The million in the ground at the dump was her terrifying, surreal secret and her only hope. Once her most acute needs were met, conscience began to gnaw at Anna. The money burned inside her. She monitored local news, searched for information about thefts, losses. A report about a missing cash-in-transit bag flashed by, but it mentioned a special bag, had a serial number, and the amount was different. This money seemed to have fallen out of a different pocket of reality. Maybe kickbacks, maybe someone's undeclared income, stored for a rainy day, lost or stolen and discarded in panic. Anna realized that finding the lawful owner without drawing suspicion onto herself was nearly impossible. And so she decided, this money had to be cleansed. Not through a church candle but through action. She created a strict internal charter for herself. One part of the money, strictly for establishing a stable life, modest housing, restoring documents, retraining courses. Another, more significant part, for finding and retrieving Katia. And a third for helping others. Thus was born the idea, still vague, of not just giving handouts but creating something systemic. She remembered the eyes of other women at the bottom. Lost, extinguished. She understood them like no one else. The money wasn't meant to make her rich. It was meant to become a tool for redemption and a return to humanity. This was the longest, most painful and most expensive journey. Not in monetary but in emotional terms. She hired an experienced but stern family lawyer. There's a chance, the female attorney said. But you'll have to prove everything. Stable income, housing, psychological stability. And most importantly, you'll have to rebuild your relationship with your daughter from scratch. She's afraid of you. She doesn't remember you like this. Anna went through a series of humiliating and frightening commissions. Psychologists, psychiatrists, social services. She cried during sessions with the psychologist, dragging all her pain and guilt to the surface. She got her first simplest job as a courier so that an entry would appear in her work record. She rented a small but clean and bright apartment, bought a child's bed, books, toys. Every purchase for Katia she experienced as a sacred act. The first meeting under the supervision of social services was hell. 7-year-old Katia, stern and wary, looked at her as if she were a strange aunt. Anna didn't cry, didn't rush to hug her. She simply talked quietly about little things. Then came the second, third meeting. She was learning to be a mother all over again. She spent not money but time and soul. When the court ruled to return her daughter, Anna had no strength left for joy. There was only the deepest, all-consuming sense of responsibility and a fragile, tremulous happiness that seemed afraid to shatter from an awkward movement. The first night, when Katia fell asleep in her new room and Anna sat by her bed, listening to her steady breathing, became the moment when the million finally transformed from currency into a bridge. A bridge she had crossed. With her life pieced back together, Anna returned to her third vow. She hadn't forgotten the taste of hunger, the cold of a concrete floor in a gateway, the feeling of complete invisibility. Her foundation to help homeless women, Anchor Point, began small. She rented a basement space, hired a social worker, a former homeless woman who had managed to climb out herself, and a lawyer. This wasn't about handing out alms. It was a system of first aid. Warm clothes, food, a shower, a medical checkup. But most importantly, legal and psychological support. Help with restoring documents, communicating with government agencies, job searches. Anna personally spoke with many, sharing her story not as a fairy tale about a miracle, but as a cautionary tale and an example. She knew that giving a fish was not enough. You had to hand over a fishing rod, show how to use it, and most importantly, instill the belief that it was possible. The money dwindled, but Anna didn't regret it. Every ruble spent acquired meaning. She saw how in the eyes of these women who had lost everything, a spark would ignite, not of hope for a million, but of hope that tomorrow could be slightly less terrible than yesterday. She was creating a community of mutual aid, where one woman having grown stronger would help another. The million ran out. It went toward the apartment, the lawyer's treatment, the first months of the foundation's work, Kadia's education. Anna did not become financially independent. She got a job as an accountant at one of the charitable organizations that cooperated with her foundation. Numbers re-entered her life, but now they held a different meaning. They were donation amounts, costs for medicine, salaries for social workers. She regained her profession, but now her work was filled with purpose. She felt not like a cog but part of something living and important. The respect she saw in the eyes of colleagues, beneficiaries, even formerly skeptical relatives, was more valuable to her than any sum. She was Anna again. Not homeless Anna, but Anna, a mother, a specialist, the head of a small but significant endeavor. She learned to look people in the eye again and not avert her gaze. Exactly a year later, on an equally piercing autumn day, Anna drove to the city's outskirts. In her modest used car. She got out and walked toward the dump. Now she was in a clean, warm coat, her hair neatly cut, her back straight. The dump hadn't changed. The wind still drove the trash. But for her, the place had transformed. It was no longer a symbol of the end, but a point of bifurcation. A place where her life had taken an unimaginable turn. She stood where she had sobbed in despair and felt no pain. There was only a quiet, stern gratitude. Gratitude for the trial and for the chance. She thanked this place, for the pain that had tempered her, and for the chance she had managed not to miss. Sometimes, she thought, fate places its gifts not on velvet pillows, but in the deepest filth, testing whether a person has the strength to discern them amidst decay and debris. Anna's story is not about finding treasure. It is about what you do when you find it, while at the very bottom. The money didn't change her character. It gave space for her true character, crushed by circumstances, to manifest itself. It was not a reward but a trial by fire. The million turned out to be a bridge. Fragile, dangerous, leading over an abyss. But she crossed it. Not to wealth but to herself. To her daughter. To the possibility of extending a hand to others still floundering in the cold water. Her life didn't become a fairy tale. It retained scars, anxieties, financial difficulties. But it gained the main thing, meaning and dignity. And that proved to be the only currency that never depreciates. Her story speaks of a simple, yet terrifyingly complex truth. Even in the very heart of darkness, amidst refuse and oblivion, one can find not only the end, but the most difficult, the most important thing, the beginning.